Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this Canberra Business Chamber webinar on expanding into Southeast Asia with a focus on Singapore. I'm Greg Harford from the Canberra Business Chamber, and I'm really excited to be joined here today by Crystal Doyle from Export Finance Australia, Fabian Hoffman and Sebastian Blasius from Bircher Law, and Manu Streeter from Aggregate right here in Canberra. So great to have our amazing panel with us today. Singapore is a big market. It's the seventh largest export market for Australian goods and services, and it's somewhere that we have a lot to do with. There's some interesting contrasts with ACT and Singapore. We've got a massive population in Singapore, nearly 6 million people across a land area of 735 square kilometres. So that's about a quarter of the size of the ACT physically, but with many, many more people in there. So it's a big market, lots to get excited about if you're an ACT business looking to expand offshore, and we've got some great expertise on the panel with us today. Just on housekeeping matters, we do have Q&A functionality. So if you've got questions through the webinar, please use the Q&A function to pop them in, and we'll get to those at the end. Now, we were going to be joined today by Nicola Kelly from Austrade and the ACT government, who's based in Singapore, but she's unfortunately away sick. But we've got lots to keep us busy with here today. So on that note, I'd like to hand over to Crystal, who's the Associate Director for New South Wales and ACT in Business Financing for Export Finance Australia. So Crystal's going to run through a few slides, and then we'll go from there.
Thank you. Great to be here with everyone this afternoon. Bear with me as I bring up these slides. Just double checking those are showing okay?
They are.
Perfect. Okay, great. Okay, so I'm Crystal Doyle from Export Finance Australia. So within my role at Export Finance, I work with Australian businesses that are exporting across New South Wales and ACT. So just to give a bit of context about the organisation, I did see some familiar names on the registration list, so some of you may have met with me before. For those that aren't familiar with our organisation, we are the government's export credit agency. We've been around for well over 65 years now. We're a federal government agency. And one of the key purposes of why we exist, or what we do in the market, is supporting Australian businesses that are exporting. So businesses that are selling products or services abroad. And the way that we support those Australian businesses is by providing a range of finance solutions. So primarily debt finance solutions. A few distinguishing factors. So there are obviously government agencies that have a number of grants, but we are specifically the finance side. So it is loans. So the easiest way to think of us is to think of a very niche bank. So we provide loans and finance solutions for a very specific purpose, which is helping Australian businesses on their export journey. So we don't compete with banks or existing financiers in the market. The reason that we exist in the market is there is a clear gap. So a lot of my clients may already have existing relationships with their bank here in Australia. But what we tend to see is that once businesses are exporting and dealing with international parties, the banks either may have no appetite or limited appetite to support working capital or loans for helping you set up operations or facilities offshore. And so there is a clear gap where businesses need that support to help them on their export journey. Just quickly, so we have a number of different industries that we support. So we've got clients across the board. In Canberra, I especially see a number of businesses that are in the services and technology space and also defence. But we have, clients right across the board. So food and wine, beverage. In WA, we have a lot of mining and construction clients. So businesses right across the board. just to give you an idea of what some of the different finance solutions might look like for a business. So we've got a loan, which generally I see this used by our newer exporters, where you have a lower lending requirement. So this can support businesses from anywhere from 20,000 to 350,000. Most commonly, I see my clients use this for export market development costs. So if you're attending trade shows overseas, maybe you've got costs associated with certifications, accreditations to be able to sell into an international market. A loan may help you with those costs. Also see a lot of businesses where they may be successful in getting their first couple of purchase orders or contracts with an international buyer. It may be larger than what you're used to here in Australia, and so you need some support in terms of working capital to be able to go ahead with that contract or that particular order. So there's a variety of different reasons or purposes that you can use this loan for, but that gives you a general idea. There's plenty of information on the small business export loan on our website as well. And you can see some of the stories from our other customers that have used it. There are also a number of other finance solutions for our customers that are operating on a larger scale. So this is where I come in to support and work out a bespoke solution for your business. So a lot of my clients will have funding requirements well above 350,000. We don't have a cap with how much we can support businesses with. It really just depends on what makes sense for a business. So some of our other finance solutions may be from 500,000 to 50 million. So there's quite a large gap in terms of what we can do. So very commonly, a lot of my clients will use what we call an export line of credit. So a good example, we have a number of fashion design clients, which they have a very long lead time. So they're paying their suppliers for materials. They're then getting garments manufactured, shipped to their clients, and they may offer payment terms. So there can sometimes be a lag time of 6 months where they've got cash out the door, but quite a long time until they actually receive cash back into their business. And so a line of credit to support their international orders is really beneficial. Just like a bank, we also have term loans, which can be used for a variety of reasons. Commonly, I see businesses that are expanding their footprint offshore. So if you are setting up in Asia, you may have costs such as, might start off as hiring your first salesperson on the ground, and you might need some funding for that. It could also be setting up an office or setting up a operations manufacturing facility. You may have plant and equipment to fit out your facility. That's a big area that we support our clients. It just means that they've got access to capital to be able to do that without it being a detriment to their existing operations here in Australia. And then performance and warranty bonds. So some of our clients that are tendering for contracts, and we do see this in the defence or construction space, if you are required to provide what's called a performance or warranty bond or guarantee, your bank will be able to support you with these. However, what we find is that a lot of clients are asked to provide 100% cash cover, or in some cases, property security. Some of my SME clients aren't able to provide that to a bank. And so we are able to provide those types of financial instruments for significantly less cash cover. So for my clients that have a lot of international projects, or maybe it's larger than what they do here in Australia, this can be really beneficial. Just to give a idea of, some of the customer stories, McGregor Coxall is one of my clients that is involved in landscape architectural city design. They were successful in winning a contract for a Middle East company. This was the largest project contract that they had ever done. So it was really game-changing for their business. However, very different payment terms to what they were used to in Australia. So for this business, they were invoicing their clients for the services, but waiting 90, sometimes more days to receive payment from the buyer. In the meantime, they obviously have to pay their staff and their subcontractors. So having a line of credit for their business was essential for them to be able to go ahead with this international contract. And the Retail Score is also another client of mine. They are a software platform. It's more of a technology business that has built a platform that a lot of retailers and wholesalers use to be able to bring together data in an easy, usable way across multiple platforms. So this business was established in Australia, but they knew they had a lot more clients they could target in the US. So we supported them with a loan so that they could get their first few sales and relationship management staff on the ground to really help grow and launch into the US. And it just meant that they were able to launch into that market quicker with our help. So hopefully that just gave you a bit of an idea of what we can do and how we can support businesses. I'll leave contact details here. If you do have further questions, feel free to ask in the chat, or I'm more than happy to meet separately and have a discussion one-to-one. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Crystal, for that overview of Export Finance Australia. And at this point, we'll move to Fabian and Sebastian, who are going to have a chat to us about issues specific to Singapore and dispute resolution, cross-border contracts, immigration and arbitration rules. So Sebastian's joining us today from Bangkok. Fabian's here in Canberra. So welcome to both of you. Great to have you here, and I'll hand over to you. Again, sorry, if I could just say, if you do have any questions to members of our audience, please just use the Q&A function and we'll get to those at the end. Hand over to you, Fabian and Sebastian.
Yeah, thank you very much. Let me just start our presentation. So I hope everybody can see this well. So yeah, Singapore is an interesting market, very vibrant, and it's the gateway to Southeast Asia. So usually one of your first connections into Southeast Asia. It has very specific advantages if you base your contracts in Singapore. First of all, the language. So it's English speaking, which is obviously an advantage compared to other areas there. And the Singapore legal system has a clear basis in the common law as well, which means it's a very familiar legal system. It doesn't feel too far away from what we are used to. In many cases, the Singapore courts have applied Australian decisions in their findings. And Singapore is, generally speaking, widely regarded as a neutral and very business-friendly forum. So in terms of a contract, one of the questions that you always will have to ask is what kind of law do you want to apply and what kind of forum do you want to litigate your cases if it really comes to that stage. Singapore clearly is one of the better locations for that. Beside the question of which law you want to apply, one of the questions is always the jurisdiction or the seat of arbitration if you choose an alternative dispute resolution mechanism. And Singapore is a very good location for that as well. It is very neutral and modern. We will talk about this more in the SIAC arbitration rules, where some very modern changes have been done in the last couple of months. And the next question is, if you really get into Singapore, what happens if you really get a title, may it be from a court judgment or an arbitral award, the enforceability is also very good. So the court decisions will be enforceable in both countries under common law rules, and the arbitral awards will be enforceable under the New York Convention. Having that said, you want to consider a couple of things when you draft your contracts. So you want to have very clear contracts which line out exactly what kind of mechanisms you want to use. You want to be wide in areas that allow you some negotiation, but you want to clearly address everything that's really important for you in the cross-border transactions. Therefore, we always consult with specialists, Sebastian being one of our specialists. We work together, but we also work together with specialists in the intellectual property area and other areas to make sure that your contracts are as good as they can be if you enter into a cross-border contract. The next point is the Singapore Arbitration Court. So the SIAC, the Singapore International Arbitration Forum, is a very modern forum which allows a very modern way of resolving your conflicts if it comes to it. They have in January 2025 introduced further advancements, expedited procedures that allow even resolution in the preliminary stages of any disputes. The digital processes are improved. You can submit your files. You can do almost everything electronically, which means the distance between Singapore and Canberra or Australia is not a hindrance, and it is very transparent. It's one of the only jurisdictions for arbitration where they publish their decisions. So one of the advantages of arbitration is that they are private and they will not be shared publicly. But in Singapore, those decisions will be in a general form without specifics about the case being published. So you have a set of rules that you can apply to see where you are and to prepare for your case. And with having that said, I would like to hand over to Sebastian, who is an expert in immigration questions for Singapore.
Thank you so much, Fabian. So yeah, good afternoon, everyone. From my end, my name is Sebastian Blasius. I'm a lawyer with Gateway Law Corporation in Singapore, and I serve as special counsel in Australia whenever matters to Singapore or related to Singapore come up. In my part of the presentation, I would like to give you a brief overview about some immigration essentials. So what do you have to take into consideration if you want to expand your business activities into Singapore? Basically, we have to differentiate between two scenarios here. The first one being your company not yet having its own business presence in Singapore. And the second one, of course, the opposite, what happens once you have set up your company. So as long as you do not have a business presence into Singapore, what you need to take into account basically depends on what you want to do in Singapore. There are activities which do not require any approval or notification to the authorities whatsoever, but that is really quite limited in scope. So you can fly touring, company retreats, and so forth. That is all possible without any approval. If you want to send your Australian employees to Singapore to do some work there, then if you're lucky, the activity that they want to carry out is a so-called work pass exempt activity. These are activities that do also not require any approval. You simply have to notify the Singapore authorities that these activities will be conducted. A very common example is if your employees come to Singapore to do some servicing, repair, or maintenance work on machines or on equipment. Work pass activities are to 90 days per calendar year, so it's only a temporary thing. If employees come for longer, they will need an employment pass, and as your company is not active in Singapore yet, this will need to be applied for by a Singapore sponsor, who will then also be the main point of contact for everything regarding that employment pass. Usually that would be your service recipient. If you have a business presence in Singapore, the foreign employees you want to hire will need a work pass. There are many different types of work passes, but the three main ones that may be relevant for you are the employment pass, the S pass, and the work permit. The employment pass is meant for professionals, managers, executive, and technicians, highly qualified employees who earn a certain minimum salary monthly. At the moment, the minimum qualifying salary is at least $5,600 a month for employees of general sectors, but higher salaries are necessary if your company is in the finance sector. And in addition, the minimum qualifying salary increases with age. So an employee who is like 45 will need a much higher salary. The good thing about the employment pass is that it's not subject to any quotas. However, there are also some other points that have to be taken into account. There is a points-based system where every application has to earn 40 points in order to be successful in areas such as skills, salary, workforce diversity, and support for local employment. If the employee is not suitable for an employment pass, you may still consider an S pass and a work permit. The salary requirements of an S pass are much lower. It's at the moment a starting salary of $3,150, respectively $3,650 in the financial services sector. However, there are quota and levy requirements. For example, for companies in the services sector, the maximum amount of workers with an S pass is 10% of the total workforce. And this is even stricter with regard to some categories of the work permit, which is generally meant for unskilled or semi-skilled migrant workers. So the devil is, of course, in the detail, but we only have very limited time, of course, here in that presentation. So if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us at a later point in time. And with that, I would like to hand over the floor back to Fabian.
Yeah, thank you, Sebastian. And it's really just a very quick overview what we are doing. So Butcher Law is a Australian law firm. We have a presence in Canberra, where our head office actually is, in Canberra Avenue in Manuka, and we have an office in Sydney and in Melbourne. We have expertise in cross-border transactions. We are part of a very strong local and international network, and we can, with this support, provide very tailored legal solutions to you. In Singapore, we work together with Gateway. Sebastian is working for Gateway. They have a deep local experience in Singapore and can also provide comprehensive legal support in Singapore. And if you would like to contact us, I have our contact details here and a QR code, and we maybe later share as well the URL to this. So we've made a little web page on our website specifically for this topic. There are already some frequently asked questions, and Sebastian and I will continue to keep that updated. So if you have any questions, there's a good chance you will see it there. And if not, you know how to find us. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Fabian and Sebastian. And at this point, I'd like to hand over to Manu Sridhar, who is from Aggregate, a business based in Canberra, which is exporting agricultural goods to Singapore and indeed expanding up there. So Manu, thanks for joining us, and I'll hand over to you.
Thank you, Greg, and good day to everybody. Let me just share my screen. Hopefully that comes through okay. There you go. Is that all good?
It is.
Thank you. So, good day, everyone. Again, thanks for making the time to be here today, and obviously the opportunity for me to share a bit about Aggregate, who we are. You must be wondering, what do we have to share? But hopefully, we've learned a few things around our journey of exporting, starting with Singapore, which is obviously a very close trading partner, as Greg mentioned earlier. And of course, we've learned a lot, and obviously a great opportunity to share with others who are just starting or who might already be in the process. And I'm looking forward to seeing what we did and what we're doing right now. So I'm Manu. I'm the head of operations for Aggregate. I currently oversee all our company's exports. We initially started about 10 years ago, just exporting to one or two countries, but we're exporting to over 30 countries today, all across the globe. Singapore obviously being a very important part of it. Although it's a small market, there are a lot of advantages and opportunities that Singapore presents, and strategically we see it as a very important place of business for us, at least in the future of food transport, logistics, and connectivity to the rest of Asia. But a bit about Aggregate. Our mission is really to see rejuvenate rural and regional Australia through expansion of long-term export opportunities for producers. And we're making this happen through the use of more effective logistics and technology, and connecting consumers more directly with producers. And our vision really is to place Australia as a provider of food security to the world through multi-seasonal contracts, which we're very proud of what we've achieved. And obviously, there's still a long way to go, but we look forward to how this unfolds. And we mainly focus on meat, dairy, and fruit exports out of Australia. Um, so again, coming back to one of the things that we were thinking of, Singapore, if you look at it, is a small market, and some might ask why Singapore? To us, the major advantage that we saw was Singapore is a major food hub for Asia. The logistics and connectivity to rest of Asia is world class, and the free trade agreements that Australia has in place with Singapore and to wider parts of Asia where majority of our food is consumed gave us a really strategic advantage to be placed in Singapore. We saw a great growth in demand for high quality food, especially after COVID, where there was a significant interest placed on food security, especially for Singapore being a country that imports over 90% of its food. There was a lot of importance placed on securing the food supplies, and therefore we were one of the opportunities that we saw was to look at what can we do to build that food security in Singapore, but also to the wider region. And of course, I've got a few of the logos down there, some of the major retailers that we work with in Singapore. And I'm sure, I think I did see a few participants registered in the liquor space as well. There's one name there. They're the largest liquor distributor in Singapore. But we work with these guys. They're mainly focused on supplying high-end premium Australian produce, but that we work with as well to supply into Singapore. So for us, Singapore being a mix of Western and Asian culture was sort of a good starting point to understand, because it's all about building relationships. It's a people-driven economy. The businesses are people-driven. So in-person meetings help a lot in building trust, because that's always number one. It's what we've learned, that it's important to build the trust in order to build long-term business in Singapore and wider Asia as well. And there's a lot of resources available online around the compliance and regulations that are required to be able to export to Singapore. The SFA, for example, in the food industry, the SFA is the Singapore Food Authority. They have all or a lot of information on what is required to export food to Singapore. But separately, also Austrade is a great resource to be able to tap into, to understand what the requirements are to be able to get your product into Singapore. Um, and secondly, it's really important to understand the consumer and what they're really looking for, and being able to provide a product that the customer really wants. So, one thing that we found out is Singapore is a highly visual driven market. They like to see feel and touch a product before they can justify its price tag or justify its quality and why they should keep repurchasing a product. So packaging is really important. And obviously before all of that, research, I would say, is a key to be able to gather information. For us in the food industry, the Food Hotel Asia is a major food exhibition that happens every year in Singapore, where you don't just have your Singaporean distributors, but you have people from all over Asia coming into Singapore, and it's a great opportunity to look at what products are in Singapore, what new products are coming into Singapore, and to be able to understand where you really fit in amongst the entire capability across the world. And obviously, my example here is for food, but just like that, for every industry, you've got major congregations in Singapore where you can have the opportunity to look at what's out there. It's obviously some of the things that we saw, as I said, Singapore is a small market, and therefore the competition is quite wide. One of the things that we saw was it was you need to really work hard on standing out. And obviously as a high quality meat exporter, we compete with other markets like Brazil, Argentina, Uruguay, in the United States. But we found our niche in the market. But obviously, we have a wider market presence across other countries in Asia. Singapore, obviously, it's really important to ensure that you have a unique selling point. You're really working hard on it and making sure that the customers understand what that unique selling point is, and it's what they want. Um, Logistics costs, of course, it's Singapore is a high cost country. So internal logistics costs are generally higher than what we would expect in Asia. And then of course you got your currency fluctuations. If you're selling in Singaporean dollars, that can be a consideration. But I'm sure our friends with and lawyers will be able to assist with matters like that. Um, and so, yeah, really, what my best advice in entering Singapore really would be to, do the research, have as much as of an opportunity to meet people in person. I think that's a great investment to make at the early stages, and what we did in building trust. And that's a very core principle of doing business in Singapore and Asia. Um, but Singapore has, I'm sure if you've been visited Singapore, the food scene's great. We're doing our part to make it even better through some of our Aussie Wagyu. So next time you're there, don't forget to check out some of Aggregate's Wagyu products in the major steakhouses. And I'm happy to share more insights. And if anybody would like to connect with me, I'm very happy to share insights. You can connect with me on LinkedIn. My name's Manu Sridhar. I'm sure you'll have that on your list from the email sent out earlier. So yeah, thank you very much, and hopefully that was of value to everybody.
All right, thank you very much, Manu. That's really useful, I think. Can I just put a call out for questions now? If anyone does have any questions, just pop them into the Q&A function there in the chat. But I might just turn to Sebastian in the first instance. Obviously, you're an expert in immigration issues around Singapore, but how important do you think it is to have a physical presence there if you are trying to export product into the Singaporean market?
Good question. And I think it really depends on what you want to do in Singapore. Like if you are in a purely export business, you can do it without a physical presence. But Singapore has a rule that says once you are conducting business in Singapore, you need to register at least a branch office. So what is conducting business? That is a bit tricky because we don't have a very clear definition in the law. So we would need to look at the business model of each and every company to see if it falls under this definition of conducting business. And if it does so, the question is surely if a branch registration is sufficient or if the setup of an own legal entity like a private company and limited by shares would be the much better option.
Okay, thank you. Manu, how have you gone in the Singaporean market? You've got people in Singapore frequently, but you don't have anyone on the ground there as yet. Is that right?
Yeah, Greg, like obviously as Sebastian mentioned, we're purely an export business at this stage into Singapore. So we work with partners in Singapore who take care of distribution internally. And we focus on getting our product to Singapore. So right at the moment we don't have a physical presence. As I said in my presentation earlier, we are moving into a more strategic opportunity and to use Singapore's connectivity and logistics. We will be setting up an entity in Singapore as we will be conducting business there.
Okay. And in the earlier period where that physical presence hasn't been there, you talked about the importance of building relationships and trust. How have you gone about that?
Um, See, the thing in Asia, especially in Singapore, is what we call an open market, is that you've got, hundreds of people all across the world trying to supply food and other products. Singapore, Hong Kong, these are pretty open markets. And as a result, a lot of these distributors, they might be small, medium, large, they have the exposure of getting bombarded with so many opportunities of products that they can take on their shelves from all across the world, and it's very hard to sort of put yourself in their shoe, looking at which one's actually good, who can we trust, and who do we want to bring on long term, because in the supermarket acquisition process, getting a product into shelves can be a very long and tedious process, and they don't want to bring in suppliers for a couple of months and then put in effort again, bring somebody else to replace that. So it's a very important process where you really need to show effort, in that you want, again, it's coming back to standing out from the crowd. And I think effort is an important part in showing them that you're making the time to actually come and see them in person, and understand the market, and have these conversations with them, business and personal, and build that trust before you can actually get the business.
Okay, thank you. Fabian, how do obviously Singapore is a very business friendly economy. How do regulatory frameworks in Singapore support foreign companies in comparison to other markets in Southeast Asia?
I guess it's mainly by being a very neutral forum. So Singapore is known to be very forthcoming with modern systems in order to allow very open and fair and neutral trade. I think it's one of the few jurisdictions where you can overcome this, what we call home court concerns, by not being at home. So they're very open with these kind of regulations, and I think this modern approach is very, very important.
All right, thank you. So I'm just jumping between screens here. Crystal, what if you've got a business that is looking for finance from Export Finance Australia, what are some of the key criteria that those businesses might need to be looking to meet?
Yes. So some of the key ones to be aware of, we are only relevant at a point in time. So businesses that have a minimum turnover of 250,000 and are post-revenue. So if you have been in R&D phase and you haven't had runs on the board yet, it would be too early for us. Generally, we look to see that a business has been in operation and trading for around 2 years, just so we can see what the history of the business has been like. And then also, it is easier if a business has been operating in a profit for the last few years. But if your business hasn't been profitable yet or hasn't reached break even and moved into profitability, we can support, so long as we can see in the next year the business will transition to break even and move into profitable territory. In that case, we can still consider.
Okay, thank you. And is there anything specific about the Singapore market that you look at, or are those just general rules that apply across the board?
Those are just a general, so apply for any market.
Okay.
If there aren't any, I had a question actually for Manu. Question was, so when you've got inventory, you know, on its way to Singapore and maybe sitting, I don't know if it's with 3PLs or people that are helping get the inventory out. What do you do in terms of protecting that inventory?
Yeah, so one of the things that there are multiple options that they're available to protect it. But as a baseline, payment terms are obviously a very important part of protecting the business here. So we're always prepaid by our customers across the globe. That's obviously the easiest way to do it, but there's a lot of other options like, credit insurance and invoice factoring, non-recourse finance, and there's a lot of options out there that potential exporters can explore. But we're very fortunate to have developed partnerships where our customers trust us to be able to have upfront payment, protects us, but also we honor that by ensuring that they receive good quality product on time, that sort of thing.
All right. Now, look, we've got one final question, also, Manu, for you. What are there unique considerations when exporting agricultural products to Singapore in terms of packaging, quality standards, or labeling? Is there anything you wouldn't do here in Australia? And is there anything specific to the Singapore market?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think very recently Singapore has brought in a sugar content labeling requirement. So anyone who's exporting beverages with sugar involved should be aware. It's called a Nutri grade. Ranges from A to D and basically takes into account fat, sugars, and gives it a grade of a product. And those labeling requirements are something that's just coming recently, and that's something worth noting. But otherwise, in general, they're obviously exporting regulations, not just for Singapore, but anywhere across the world with Australian exporting regulations, and these are mutually government agreed regulations such as labeling and health certificates, halal requirements. I suppose halal is a very important consideration for Singapore, as it's a majority of their consumption requires a halal certificate, although not all. It is a consideration to ensure that there's compliance in halal. It opens up a bigger portion of the market.
Okay. All right. Well, look, I don't think there's any more Q&As coming in from the floor. So, look, thank you very much to our panelists, Crystal, Manu, Sebastian, and Fabian. We will circulate the slides that we'll use today for the interest of those people attending the call. Thank you very much for your questions. Thank you very much for your interest. And may your exporting journey to Singapore go well. Thank you, everyone. We'll call it a day there. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.